next speaker, Mr. Joseph Hughes. He is the Senior Partner, Global Leader, Life Sciences Operations and Quality Practice at McKinsey and Company. So can we have Mr. Hughes, please? Stage is yours. Thank you very much.
Afternoon. It's a pleasure to be speaking with you this afternoon about the future of operations and quality in life sciences. I'm Joe Hughes, a senior partner with McKinsey and Company, based in our US office. Next slide, please. India's life sciences industry has been on a strong growth trajectory, as we all know. 2021, roughly a $42 billion US industry size, rapidly growing, expecting to be 65 billion to 120 to 130 billion by 2030, encompassing about 3,000 drug companies and 10,500 manufacturing sites. India is the third largest globally by volume produced of life science products and medical goods. In addition to that, it's got a long proven track record of great contributions to public health globally. Now an exporter of to more than 200 countries, pre-COVID representing 60% of the global vaccine demand served globally. India supplies 40% of the generics pharmaceuticals to the United States and 25% of all pharmaceuticals to the UK. Truly a global player with a tremendous growth and track record of delivery. Next page, please. While it's been on a tremendous growth path, it's also important to think about the future and the path ahead. Globally today, we are witnessing a number of disruptions and accelerating trends leading to a number of questions facing the industry when it comes to operations and quality. First, the introduction of new technology in operations and quality. How is that going to shape costs, quality, performance of our manufacturing assets, supply chain performance, et cetera? Second, new modalities. Are we ready for the new modalities? How fast are they growing? What's their share going to be? What are the implications of that on our operating assets? Third, establishing the end-to-end connectivity of the supply chain. What are the expectations of various steps in the supply chain for visibility and transparency around data, around inventory, around product and features and product performance? We have the continuing perennial pushes on continuous improvement, driving improvements in quality and lowering costs. We have ensuring the environmental sustainability of our operations. How do we deal with waste? How do we deal with recyclability? How do we deal with decarbonization? We have accelerating product launches with new modalities, with old modalities. And we obviously continue to have the issue around talent scarcity, talent acquisition. How do we actually drive improvements in the acquisition, development, and retention of our talent? These aren't unique to life sciences industries. They're affecting, not all of these are unique to the life sciences industries. They're affecting many industries simultaneously. When we look to the next page, and we take these questions and develop, if we can go to the next page, we see 6 major trends affecting life sciences specifically. With the technology, the digital, the analytics, the automation, the continuous manufacturing, what will that adaptation mean for us in terms of performance outcomes? And we see core technology adoption being a must-have for pharmacos in the medium and in the long term in terms of overall performance. Additionally, we see traditional modalities, continuing to grow, but we have new modalities emerging, potentially 40% of the global pipeline being new modalities in just a short bit of time. Number 3, supply chains will be pushed to build more resilience, as we've seen and we'll talk about in a little bit, against future disruptions, increasing speed and agility, and more predictability. around the future. Environmental sustainability continues to be an imperative. It's accelerating. It is different by regions of the world, but it's not something that's likely to go away anytime in the future. We also have questions around the expectations of pharma quality and specifically around the enterprise integration of smart quality and making quality performance more reliable, less costly, and more integrated into the business. And lastly, around the skills of the future, we've got significantly different demands and needs for talent in the future, leading to different operating models and different methods by which we're going to have to work with our people and develop our people over time. We're going to focus today's discussion on the top four and go through each of them in turn in a little bit here. Next page. Technology has been part of the story for many, many years. And technology changes, but the forces at work continue to be never ending, right? Continuing to push us forward. We're about to embark upon the fourth, or some would say we're actually in the middle of, the fourth technology-enabled revolution. The first being with the advent of the steam engine, the second with the combustion engine, the third with the internet and information. And now, building upon internet and information, we now are getting into one that is going to be driven by connectivity, data and analytics, and automation. We think that this will lead to a new S-curve across industries, but particularly in life sciences. We can envision a world in just a few short years where we have a 40 to 50% improvement in quality outcomes, 30 to 50% reduction in the cost position through operational effectiveness and productivity, and a 30% improvement in delivery performance with lower lead times, lower levels of inventory, and higher agility in the supply chain. Over the next 5 to 10 years, it's easy to imagine that we won't recognize the industry that we operate in as these trends take hold. Next page. This page shows at least 10, I think we've got 11 on here. There's a number of different technologies that are transforming our future factories. I'd like to highlight a couple. The first one, upper left, around the future of connectivity and IoT. With data costs falling, with sensor costs falling, with analytical horsepower rising so dramatically in the last few years, we see a major shift happening in the world of advanced analytics and the ability to mine the data that organizations already have to unlock the next levels of performance and quality in operations. In many industries, as little as 10% of all the data that's actually collected is utilized and understood. And so we're sitting on a mountain of opportunity if we can figure out a way to harness the sensor technology, the analytic horsepower to drive predictive and preventative opportunities to drive performance within our assets and to identify causes of problems before they're actually manifest in our operations. The second is in the upper right-hand side around new levels of automation, in particular process automation. As we continue to face labor scarcity and cost pressures in the inflationary environment that many organizations are feeling today, plus with the idea that automated processes are more easily replicable, repeatable, and the outcomes more sustainable, we see automation coming in all forms into the workforce, whether that be in the direct frontline manufacturing type of environment or in the back office performance. We see automation driving tremendous leaps forward in performance. Another one is the advent of 3D and 4D printing, new manufacturing technologies that are enabling new products, new product features, new product performances. An example of that from another industry is General Electric, where they are actually 3D printing now entire jet engines, while in small form factor, moving towards higher form factor with that, and able to actually differentiate materials and shapes to actually increase performance of engines as it goes. So you can imagine similar technologies. I believe that there are good examples within pharma today of using 3D and 4D printing for construction of product. And lastly, at the bottom of the page, we see end-to-end connectivity through the entire supply chain. And we'll talk about this in a little bit, but the idea here is that these technologies enable better transparency, better connectivity, and better performance to work out all of the sources of waste in the system, end to end, from raw material supply all the way through to end consumer. And there's a rising expectation around in many parts of the world through various stages of the life sciences supply chain to drive this level of performance and drive this level of connectivity, so that the value flows more directly to the ultimate stakeholder of our industry, which is the patient and the consumer at the far right hand side. Next page. And as the second trend then is with the big growth in new modalities and the transition in our products, right? If we think about our first wave being around the rise of small molecule, the second horizon being around the rise of biologics, we're now in the midst of the beginning of the biorevolution with CGT and RNA therapies and technologies. We estimate that as much as 1/3 of all the pipeline for the industry will be related to new modalities around CGT, around RNA, and others within the next 5 years. That growth trajectory has been accelerated through COVID, and we expect it to continue to accelerate in the near future. And with this, then, the new modalities growth will have profound implications on global ops networks, the scale, the connectedness, the responsiveness, and the agility of our supply chains through our manufacturing assets and beyond. And the real question is, how, as an industry, can we step forward and deliver on these new modalities, delivering the highest quality, the most cost efficiency, and the most agile delivery to the supply chain. We go to the next page. With regards to supply chain, there were certainly issues in the supply chain before COVID hit. But as we've seen in the last 23, 24 months, COVID has accelerated the trends and actually exposed some other underlying issues facing global supply chains. 73% of global supply chain leaders encountered problems in the footprint that required change, with 92% of them increasing their footprint resiliency over the last 24 months. Mostly around increasing critical inventories to allow some redundancy and some safety stock for supply chain issues, but also dual sourcing of raw materials. 42% experienced delays in planning decisions in the remote setting as they went from in-person to remote. 80% have invested significant sums of money and energy into driving digital planning. First, trying to improve supply chain visibility, and second, deploying specific use case and point solutions to solve pain points in their supply chain. 98% believe they lack the in-house talent to implement digital ways of working. So 85% of them have increased their digital talent by reskilling their workforce, acquiring new talent, and leveraging more contract hires in the short term in order to fill critical skill gaps. 89% have realized the need to basically increase their overall supply chain resiliency, both by monitoring supplier risks and monitoring demand risks. One of the things that was interesting with COVID is that by and large, it was a 20 to 100 time increase in demand. And a demand shock was not something that most supply chains had actually anticipated prior to COVID. So we had a demand shock, not a supply shock, and that surprised a lot of folks. But as we move forward, the demand side is driving implications on how we think about supply side and manage the resiliency better. And a lot of folks are starting to think about supply chains as both reliability meaning how do I make my supply chain work when things go wrong, and then resiliency, thinking about it as how do I actually get back and respond quickly when things happen. So reliability is prevention and resiliency is response. Next page, please. Across industries, we're seeing tremendous leaps in performance, and we're also seeing that those that are most resilient also outperform their peers in terms of performance characteristics across the reliability of their supply chain, their improved operational metrics, and the ability to prevent or mitigate the disruptions that come in. So we see performance across all three dimensions, and examples on this page around various elements of that performance across their supply chain. Next page. What is interesting is that across those performances, there are 8 characteristics that underpin high quality, high reliability, high performance supply chain. One is the end-to-end visibility, as we've already talked about, and how that gets anchored in digital actions. It encompasses regular stress testing and reassessment of where the risks are and how their performance, how the organization would respond to them. We're seeing resiliency rise to the top of the CEO agenda. They're measuring performance in ways in which they haven't before. They're deploying new tools and new people capabilities to manage resiliency and prevent the most negative outcomes. They've had to change the governance of their supply chain and the processes for managing the supply chain. And they are enforcing new and different procurement requirements on suppliers. So this truly becomes not a supply chain functional issue. This becomes a manufacturing, a supply chain, a procurement, and a quality issue to work cross-functionally in ways in which organizations have not typically worked in the past. The next page. Last today in our conversation, we'll talk about sustainability. And I know that you have another session, I believe it's tomorrow, where we'll be diving deeper into sustainability as a topic. We do want to introduce a couple themes and a couple frames here for you to think about this evening as you go into tomorrow. The first is that sustainability is something that is here to stay, right? We get mounting pressure from various stakeholders, whether that's from investors, where we see significant increase in sustainability funding, doubling between 2018 and 2020, and expected to double or triple every couple of years from now through the foreseeable future. We see employees that actually look at sustainability topics as core to their decisions of who they work for and whether they stay working for an employer. It's obviously becoming more and more important in the regulatory regimes and environments around the world. It does differ by region, but as we see in the EU, we see strict mandates in for carbon reduction by 2030 up to 55%, and carbon neutrality by 2050 being enshrined in law, with the expectation that those objectives be met. It also encompasses Scope 1 through Scope 3 emission standards. We also see peers that are using this as a point of differentiation, not only with employees and with investors, but also with customers and the communities in which they work. Consumers are making decisions about what products they buy and who they buy them from based upon sustainability concerns, up to 76% in recent surveys. And communities are very concerned about sustainability, not only from the global warming, decarbonization, but also from waste and waste management, right? Water consumption, water treatment, recyclability and circularity of post-consumer waste. So if we jump to the next page, as we think about ESG and the three pillars of the environment, the social, and the governance, we'll be talking more about this tomorrow, but I wanted to focus on today's discussion on the left-hand side around three things. The first, around on the upper left, around decarbonization targets. We see a trend towards not only accounting for scope 1, which is the carbon that you produce yourself, but also the scope 2 and the scope 3. And in fact, in many industries, it's turning out that the scope 2 and scope 3 are the largest sources of carbon that need to be dealt with. So it's about how you work with suppliers, how you work with the logistics, how you work with other things external to your factories and to your supply chains that actually drive the vast majority of those. And so focusing on scope 2 and scope 3 is becoming increasingly important. Second, waste and recyclability. The farther up in the value chain within life sciences, the more waste and waste management has to be dealt with as part of our manufacturing processes. So you get into water usage, treatment of water, recirculation of water. But you also, in the downstream, get to product packaging, right? And the recyclability of product packaging and post-consumer waste, as well as when you get into med tech and med devices, how are we going to recycle the products that we produce in those environments as well? So the full circularity of the product from source to use and then back to source. And then again, the third one here around water, as I was highlighting earlier, this idea of water consumption, recyclability. These are things that are becoming increasingly important in many communities, and not only because of climate change issues changing water availability in various regions, but just the level of pollution and how we treat the environment around our facilities rising in the community stakeholder discussions. Next page. So we've talked about four trends: technology, we've talked about the supply chain, we've talked about sustainability, and we've talked about the technology, the industrial revolution that we're undergoing, and the trends that are affecting the various industries, subsegments of life sciences. And so with that, thank you. It's been a pleasure to share these, and I think we'll open it up to questions.